Welcome to the Workplace Minute, powered by H3HR Advisors and sponsored by WorkHuman. Thanks for joining me for a quick update on what's important in the world of work. My name is Steve Boese. Today in the Workplace Minute, we're returning to a topic I covered recently, the rapidly changing posture of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and what that shift means for DE&I efforts inside U.S. companies. Let's break it down. In that earlier episode, I warned that HR leaders should prepare for a new enforcement environment, one where diversity programs, affinity initiatives, and even long-standing inclusion practices could face legal scrutiny, including from angles that would have seemed unlikely just a few years ago. Well, now we have a very concrete example of exactly what that looks like. The EEOC has filed a lawsuit against Coca-Cola Company over an internal event that was limited to women employees. According to reporting, the event was positioned as a professional development or networking opportunity for women, something that for decades many organizations have offered as part of efforts to support groups historically underrepresented in leadership roles. But under the Commission's current direction, that kind of program is now being framed not as inclusion, but as unlawful exclusion. The lawsuit argues that by restricting participation of women, the company discriminated against their male employees, effectively denying them access to a workplace benefit based on sex. In other words, what many HR teams would have viewed as a routine diversity initiative is now being treated like a civil rights violation. And this is not an isolated incident. It reflects a broader shift in enforcement philosophy. The EEOC's leadership has signaled that it intends to aggressively pursue cases involving what it describes as discrimination against majority groups, including white men. In the prior episode, I mentioned the explicit rhetoric around protecting these workers, language that would have been almost unimaginable coming from federal civil rights regulators not that long ago. Now we're seeing that rhetoric translated into legal action. And from a strictly legal standpoint, the Commission's argument is not that complicated. Title VII prohibits employment discrimination based on protected characteristics, including sex. If an employer offers a workplace opportunity and restricts access based on gender, the agency can argue that it violates the statute, regardless of the employer's intent. The law, at least on paper, does not include a carve-out for programs designed to support historically disadvantaged groups. But from a workplace reality standpoint, this creates enormous tension. For decades, organizations have invested heavily in initiatives aimed at improving representation, advancement, and support for women and other groups who face systemic barriers. Mentoring programs, leadership forums, networking events, scholarships, sponsorship initiatives, these have been standard tools in the DE&I toolkit. Now HR leaders are being told that some of these tools may expose their organizations to legal risk. This is where the wake-up call comes in. It doesn't matter whether you personally agree with this policy direction, and I certainly don't. It does not matter whether you believe these programs are fair, necessary, or long overdue. What matters is that the enforcement landscape has changed, and regulators are actively looking for cases to make examples of. If your organization still has some of these gender-exclusive programs or race-specific initiatives or employee opportunities that are closed to certain groups, you should begin to assume those programs might be scrutinized, not hypothetically, not eventually, but right now. This does not mean companies must abandon their inclusion work altogether, but it does mean that HR teams will need to rethink how that work is designed. Programs framed around broad access, skill development, or shared business outcomes, rather than identity-based eligibility, are likely to be seen as far less risky. Open participation, transparent selection criteria, and clear links to organizational needs matter now more than ever. It also means documentation is critical. If a program exists to address a specific business challenge, for example, improving leadership pipelines, improving retention, or increasing employee engagement, that rationale needs to be explicit and defensible. Vague language about empowerment or support may no longer be sufficient. And perhaps most importantly, HR leaders can't assume that past practice equals future safety. Many companies have built their DE&I portfolios under a very different regulatory climate. Simply continuing those programs without review is a bit of a gamble. There's also a deeper lesson here about the role of HR. We're entering a period where workforce issues are increasingly politicized, often legally contested, and publicly scrutinized. HR can't just operate on autopilot. It must function both as a people advocate and a risk manager, and sometimes be in uncomfortable tension with itself. So consider this an early warning. if a company like Coca-Cola can face a federal lawsuit over a single internal event, no organization is too large, too small, or too well-intentioned to avoid attention. The bottom line is kind of simple right now. The rules of the game have changed. HR leaders need to reassess programs, consult legal counsel as needed, and design inclusion strategies that are still resilient and they'll hold up under today's interpretations of the law and not yesterday's assumptions. Because whether it makes sense to you or not, enforcement priorities are being rewritten in real time, and ignoring that reality will not protect your organization or your people. That's it for today's Workplace Minute. Thanks so much for listening, and a big thank you to WorkHuman for supporting the Workplace Minute. This episode made you think about how your organization needs to adapt its inclusion work under this new regime. Please share it with a colleague. I'm Steve Boese, and this has been the Workplace Minute from H3HR